You know, usually when we talk about a camera taking a picture, there's this expectation of just pure mechanical objectivity.
Right. Yeah. Like it's just a machine doing its job.
Exactly. The lens lets in light, the sensor captures the pixels, and boom, you have a photograph. It's binary, it's just data.
Right. It's clean. It just faithfully records whatever physical photons are, bouncing off the objects in front of the glass.
But then you step into the world of human biology, and suddenly that simple camera metaphor just completely breaks down.
Oh, totally. It falls apart.
Because we're looking at a sensory landscape that is, well, honestly, it's highly subjective and heavily filtered.
Heavily filtered, yes.
The hardware of our eyes and ears might be capturing raw data, but the software of our brain is actively constructing a reality that, well, it might not even be completely accurate.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of a constructed reality.
Yeah.
What you think is out there in the tangible world is actually just a highly edited movie playing inside your head.
Wow.
And it's being rendered in real time by a very, very opinionated director.
And today, we are going to look at the exact script for that movie. Welcome to this deep dive. For you listening right now, our mission today is to decode perception itself.
It's going to be a fun one.
We've got our hands on a fascinating breakdown of how our brains process reality. It's a textbook chapter titled Sensory, Attentional, and Perceptual Processes.
Which is such a brilliant starting point. Because it's one thing to know that we have senses, right?
Yeah.
But it's another entirely to understand the precise bottlenecks, the filters, and, the cultural habits that raw data has to pass through before you even realize you're looking at a coffee cup.
Exactly. And to make sure we don't miss a single nuance of how you see, hear, and feel reality, we're going to take a very methodical approach today.
I love it.
We are going to read the source material exactly as it is written, step by step, and then translate all that dense academic language into everyday, beginner-friendly concepts.
Because we want to know not just what the brain does, but exactly why and how it does it.
Right. Let's start right at the beginning, laying the foundation of how we know anything at all. The authors lay out a really interesting framework here. I'm going to read this first segment straight from the text.
Go for it.
Okay. Quote, "The world in which we live is full of variety of objects, people, and events. Look at the room you're sitting in. You will find so many things around. Just to mention a few, you may see your table, your chair, your books, your bag, your watch, pictures on the wall, and many other things."
Standard everyday objects.
Right. And it continues. "Their sizes, shapes, and colors are also different. If someone asks you, how can you say that these various things exist in your room or house or in the outside environment, you will most probably answer that you see or experience them all around you."
Which is a very natural response.
Exactly. And then the text says, "In doing so, you are trying to tell the person that the knowledge about various objects becomes possible with the help of our sense organs, e.g., eyes, ears."
Let's just pause right there for a second.
Yep.
Because the authors are asking a very deep philosophical question here, but they wrap it in this simple observation. How do you actually know the table in front of you exists?
You just rely completely on your biological sensors.
Exactly. And if those sensors are flawed or, they only pick up a tiny fraction of the universe, your entire reality is essentially a walled garden.
Right. I only know the table's there because my fingertips feel resistance and my eyes see light bouncing off it.
Yep.
The text goes on to explain how this data becomes knowledge. It says, "The sense organs register several kinds of information about various objects. However, in order to be registered, the objects and their qualities, example, size, shape, color, must be able to draw our attention.
Attention is key there.
The registered information must also be sent to the brain that constructs some meaning out of them. Thus, our knowledge of the world around us depends on three basic processes called sensation, attention, and perception."
Those are the big three.
And it finishes the section with, "These processes are highly interrelated, hence they are often considered as different elements of the same process called cognition."
This is the crucial distinction the text makes right out of the gate. I mean, we use the words sensation and perception interchangeably in daily life.
I definitely do.
Right. But scientifically, they are entirely different steps in an assembly line. Sensation is the raw, dumb, physical data gathering. It's the light hitting your retina. It has absolutely no meaning yet.
So sensation is just the camera lens letting in light, but perception is the software identifying that it's a picture of my dog.
Exactly. Perception is the meaning making. It's your brain taking that electrical signal and saying, oh, that's a red apple, or that's a threat.
Okay, that makes sense.
And attention, which the text places right in the middle, is the gatekeeper. Attention decides which raw sensations actually get passed up to the perception department.
Which brings us to the actual hardware doing the sensing. Listen to how the book categorizes our senses under the heading, Nature and Varieties of Stimulus.
What do they say?
Quote, "The external environment that surrounds us contains a wide variety of stimuli. Some of them can be seen while some can be heard only. There are several others that we can smell or taste. There are still others that we can experience by touching. As human beings, we are bestowed with a set of 7 sense organs."
7, not 5.
Right. Let me read the rest of it. 5 of these sense organs collect information from the external world. These are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Besides these 5 external sense organs, we have also got 2 deep senses.
Here we go.
They are called kinesthetic and vestibular systems. They provide us with important information about our body position and movement of body parts related to each other. With these 7 sense organs, we register 10 different variety of stimuli.
Okay, I feel like most people are going to stop right there and say, wait, kindergarten taught me there were 5.
I was literally just thinking that. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. What on earth are these 2 deep senses?
This is where the textbook totally shatters that kindergarten myth. The 2 deep senses are absolutely vital for simply existing in physical space.
Let's break them down.
So let's start with the kinesthetic system. This is your proprioception. It's the system that tells your brain where your body parts are, even when you can't see them.
So for you listening right now, if you close your eyes and successfully touch your index finger to the tip of your nose, that is your kinesthetic system at work.
Precisely. You didn't have to visually track your hand through the air. You have these microscopic sensors embedded in your muscles, your tendons, your joints, and they're constantly sending GPS coordinates of your limbs back to your brain.
Wow.
Without the kinesthetic sense, you wouldn't be able to walk without staring directly at your feet, and you couldn't type on a keyboard without looking at your hands.
It's just the ultimate internal feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about the vestibular system?
The vestibular system is your sense of balance and spatial orientation. It operates using these tiny fluid-filled canals deep inside your inner ear.
Inner ear, right.
Yeah, so when you tilt your head, the fluid sloshes around, bending microscopic hairs, which sends a signal to your brain about gravity and motion.
This explains why you get dizzy.
Yes.
Like if you spin around in a desk chair and then suddenly stop, your eyes tell your brain, we have stopped. But the fluid in your inner ear has momentum, so it keeps swirling around for a few seconds.
Right. The vestibular system is screaming, we are still spinning.
Exactly. Your brain gets conflicting signals from 2 different sense organs, and that sensory mismatch creates the feeling of vertigo or motion sickness.
That's exactly it.
So if our brains are dealing with this constant influx of biological data from 7 different systems, and we have these minimum thresholds just to notice things, how do we measure that?
Good question.
The text jumps into this exact problem next under the heading, Functional Limitations of Sense Organs. Let's read this part.
Let's hear it.
Our eyes cannot see things which are very dim or very bright. Similarly, our ears cannot hear very faint or very loud sounds. As human beings, we function within a limited range of stimulation.
We have our limits.
The relationship between stimuli and the sensations they evoke has been studied in a discipline called psychophysics.
Psychophysics, great word.
In order to be noticed, a stimulus has to carry a minimum value or weight. The minimum value of a stimulus required to activate a given sensory system is called absolute threshold or absolute Lyman, AL.
Okay, so the absolute threshold.
The text then gives a really great example. For example, if you add a granule of sugar to a glass of water, you may not experience any sweetness in that water.
Right, it's just 1 grain.
Addition of a second granule to water may also not make it taste sweet. But if you go on adding sugar granules one after another, there will come a point when you will say that the water is now sweet.
Naturally.
The minimum number of sugar granules required to say that the water is sweet will be the AL of sweetness.
So psychophysics, right?
Yeah.
It is literally the study of how the physical world maps onto our psychological world.
Which is so cool.
And this concept of the absolute threshold is brilliant. It's the bare minimum amount of physical energy needed to boot up your sensory hardware.
Like the starting line.
Yeah, 1 single photon of light might not be enough for your eye to fire an electrical signal to the brain.
Yeah.
You might need, say, 5 photons hitting the exact same spot. That's your visual absolute threshold.
But the text gets more specific about this sugar water experiment, and I want to push back on something here because it adds a huge caveat.
What does it say?
It says, it may be noted at this point that the AL is not a fixed point. Instead, it varies considerably across individuals and situations depending on the people's organic conditions and their motivational states.
Ah,
And
yes.
then it says, the number of sugar granules that may produce the experience of sweetness in water on 50% of occasions will be called the AL of sweetness.
Right. 50%.
Wait, so the threshold isn't a fixed objective number, it's just whatever you happen to notice 50% of the time. Why 50%?
Sounds arbitrary, right?
That sounds incredibly arbitrary. Why isn't it just a hard biological line where 1 second I can't taste sugar and the next second I absolutely can 100% of the time?
That is a fantastic question, and the answer comes down to biological noise.
Biological noise.
Yes, you are not a sterile, perfectly calibrated machine. Your body is a chaotic environment. You have blood pumping, neurons misfiring, hormones fluctuating.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. If you are exhausted or stressed, or if you just ate a spicy meal, your tongue's threshold for detecting sugar changes entirely.
So because my internal state is constantly drifting around, science can't pinpoint a single permanent threshold.
Exactly. They have to use a statistical average. If we put you in a lab and test you 100 times with a very specific, tiny amount of sugar water, the exact concentration where you correctly say, yes, I taste sugar, exactly 50 times out of 100, becomes your official absolute threshold.
It's the only way to account for human inconsistency.
It's-
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Absolute threshold is about noticing anything at all. But what about noticing a change in something that's already there?
That's the next concept.
The text introduces the next step here. Quote, the smallest difference in the value of two stimuli that is necessary to notice them as different is called difference threshold, or difference Lyman, DL.
The DL.
To understand it, we may continue with our sugar water experiment. The next question is, how many sugar granules will be needed in the water in order to experience its sweetness as different from the previous sweetness?
Right, making it sweeter.
The number of sugar granules added to the water to generate an experience of sweetness that is different from the previous sweetness on 50% of the occasions will be called the DL of sweetness.
There's that 50% again.
Thus, difference threshold is the minimum amount of change in a physical stimulus that is capable of producing a sensation difference on 50% of the trials.
To put it simply, absolute threshold asks the question, do I notice anything at all? Difference threshold asks the question, do I notice that something has changed?
I feel like we see this all the time with volume knobs on the radio.
Oh, absolutely.
If the music is playing really softly, turning the dial up one notch feels like a huge leap in volume. You notice the difference immediately.
Right.
But if the music is already absolutely blaring at a stadium concert, turning it up that exact same one notch is totally undetectable.
That's a perfect analogy. Or think about weight. If you're holding a heavy hiking backpack that weighs 50 pounds and I secretly slip a ballpoint pen into one of the pockets,
Yeah,
you won't feel the difference.
not at all.
The pen's weight is below your difference threshold, but if I slip a 5-pound brick in there, you'll definitely notice. The difference threshold is the exact number of ounces I need to add before your brain says, hey, wait a minute, this just got heavier.
So if our brains are dealing with this constantly shifting biological noise, and we are constantly surrounded by stimuli that easily pass these thresholds, I mean, the hum of the refrigerator, the weight of our shirt, the light from the window, a car driving by outside.
It's a lot.
Why aren't we just paralyzed by data overload? If the data is passing the threshold, why doesn't my brain just crash like an overloaded computer?
Well, the text addresses this exact bottleneck next. Your brain has a bouncer at the door.
Oh, Section 3, Attentional Processes. Let's look at how the authors frame this filtering mechanism.
Read away.
Quote, a large number of stimuli impinge upon our sense organs simultaneously, but we do not notice all of them at the same time. Only a selective few of them are noticed.
Makes sense.
For example, when you enter your classroom, you encounter several things in it, such as doors, walls, windows, paintings on walls, tables, chairs, students, school bags, water bottles, and so on, but you selectively focus only on one or two of them at one time.
Right, you're not analyzing the door hinges.
The process through which certain stimuli are selected from a group of others is generally referred to as attention.
And then it breaks it down, right?
Yeah, it breaks it down into distinct flavors. At this point, it may be noted that besides selection, attention also refers to several other properties like alertness, concentration, and search.
3 big ones.
Alertness refers to an individual's readiness to deal with stimuli that appear before him. Concentration refers to focusing of awareness on certain specific objects while excluding others for the moment. In search, an observer looks for some specified subset of objects among a set of objects.
It's important to realize that attention isn't just one monolithic thing. The text breaks it down beautifully into three distinct properties.
Alertness, concentration, search.
Right. Alertness is your baseline readiness. Think of a sprinter at the starting line, muscles tense, waiting for the crack of the starting pistol. That's alertness. Concentration is what you do when you are reading a dense novel and successfully tuning out the television playing in the next room. You are focusing and actively excluding everything else.
And search.
Search is what you do when you scan a crowded airport terminal looking for your friend's face.
And this next part is where the mechanics get really interesting. Listen to this spatial metaphor the text uses.
What's the metaphor?
Attention has a focus as well as a fringe. When the field of awareness is centered on a particular object or event, it is called focus, or the focal point of attention.
Focus.
On the contrary, when the objects or events are away from the center of awareness and one is only vaguely aware of them, they are said to be at the fringe of attention.
The focus and the fringe. This is how the brain saves energy.
Okay, how so?
When you walk into that classroom or into your office, your friend's face is in the focus. You are sharply, highly aware of their expression and what they are saying.
Right.
But the color of the paint on the wall or the low hum of the air conditioner, it doesn't cease to exist. It just gets pushed to the fringe.
It's just a vague background awareness.
Exactly. Your brain logs it, so if the air conditioner suddenly catches fire, you'll definitely notice. But until then, it doesn't spend precious metabolic energy analyzing the hum.
But what if we try to put multiple complex things into the focus at the exact same time?
Ah, the multitasking myth.
That brings us to box 4.1, the great multitasking debate, which the text calls divided attention. Here's what it says.
Let's hear it.
In day-to-day life, we attend to several things at the same time. You must have seen people driving a car and talking to a friend, or attending to phone calls on a mobile set, or putting on sunglasses, or listening to music.
Standard driving activities.
If we watch them closely, we will notice that they are still allocating more effort to driving than to other activities. It indicates that on certain occasions, attention can be allocated to more than one thing at the same time.
But there's a catch.
Right. However, this becomes possible only with highly practiced activities because they become almost automatic and require less attention to perform than new or slightly practiced activities.
That is the key phrase. Highly practiced.
And it gives 3 rules for this. Automatic processing has 3 main characteristics. 1, it occurs without intention. 2, it takes place unconsciously. And 3, it involves very little or no thought processes. For example, we can read words or tie our shoelaces without giving any thought to these activities.
This is a critical point that debunks a lot of modern productivity myths. The text is very clear that true divided attention, what we casually call multitasking, is an illusion unless at least one of the tasks is highly practiced and fully automatic.
So no real multitasking.
No, you cannot actively learn a new foreign language while simultaneously trying to solve complex calculus problems. Your brain's focal point physically cannot divide its conscious workspace like that.
Right. I can tie my shoes while having a deep philosophical conversation with you. Why? Because tying my shoes passes the text's 3 rules of automatic processing. I don't have to intend to make every loop of the lace, my hands do it unconsciously, and it requires 0 active thought. But if you ask me to tie a complex sailor's knot that I've never learned before, the conversation would have to completely stop. I'd have to shift that knot tying from the fringe back into my primary focus.
Exactly. When we think we are multitasking with 2 complex tasks, like writing an email while listening to a deep dive like this one, we aren't actually dividing our attention.
We aren't.
No, we're just rapidly switching our selective attention back and forth between the 2 tasks, which is incredibly exhausting and highly inefficient for the brain.
Which begs the question, if our conscious focus is so limited, how does the brain actually choose what gets into the spotlight in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question.
The text moves to selective attention to answer this. Quote, selective attention is concerned mainly with the selection of a limited number of stimuli or objects from a large number of stimuli. Factors affecting selective attention. These generally relate to the characteristics of stimuli and the characteristics of individuals. They are generally classified as external and internal factors.
Let's start with external.
External factors are related to the features of stimuli. Other things held constant, the size, intensity, and motion of stimuli appear to be important determinants of attention. Large, bright, and moving stimuli easily catch our attention.
Because of evolution.
Stimuli, which are novel and moderately complex, also easily get into our focus. Studies indicate that human photographs are more likely to be attended to than the photographs of inanimate objects.
That makes sense.
Similarly, rhythmic auditory stimuli are more readily attended to than verbal narrations. Sudden and intense stimuli have a wonderful capacity to draw attention.
If we look closely at these external factors, size, brightness, motion, sudden intense sounds, these are fundamentally evolutionary survival mechanisms.
Like avoiding tigers.
Exactly. If something in your environment is large, brightly colored, moving fast, or makes a loud crack, your brain is hardwired to force it into your focus immediately. Because for our ancestors, that large, fast-moving thing was usually a predator. Your brain doesn't give you a choice.
And the human face thing. We are such deeply social creatures that reading facial expressions was historically a matter of life and death for group cohesion. So naturally, a photograph of a face will hijack our attention faster than a photograph of a chair.
Absolutely.
But the text balances these external triggers with internal ones. Let's read the internal factors.
What do we have internally?
Internal factors lie within the individual. These may be divided into two main categories, viz. Motivational factors and cognitive factors.
Okay.
Motivational factors relate to our biological or social needs. When we are hungry, we notice even a faint smell of food. A student taking an examination is likely to focus on a teacher's instructions more than other students.
Motivation.
Cognitive factors include factors like interest, attitude, and preparatory set. Objects or events, which appear interesting, are readily attended by individuals.
This is great.
I love this connection to hunger. It perfectly illustrates how your internal physical state literally changes what you perceive in the external world. If you are deeply hungry, you will suddenly smell a bakery from 3 blocks away.
Oh, yes.
Yesterday, when you were full, you didn't even notice the bakery existed. The stimulus was exactly the same, but your internal filter changed.
It proves that we do not passively experience reality. Our current needs act like a spotlight, actively searching the environment and highlighting things that will solve our immediate biological problems.
Like finding food.
Right. Or, if you are looking to buy a red car, suddenly you see red cars everywhere on the highway. They were always there, but your cognitive interest brought them into focus.
So neurologically, structurally, how does this filtering actually happen? The authors lay out 3 major historical theories under theories of selective attention. And this gets into the nitty-gritty mechanics. I'll read the first one.
The filter theory.
Quote, filter theory was developed by Broadbent, 1956. According to this theory, many stimuli simultaneously enter our receptors, creating a kind of bottleneck situation.
A bottleneck.
Moving through the short-term memory system, they enter the selective filter, which allows only one stimulus to pass through for higher levels of processing. Other stimuli are screened out at that moment of time.
This is Donald Broadbent's early bottleneck theory. It was very, very rigid. He viewed the brain's attention system like a strict, unyielding bouncer at the door of a nightclub.
A bouncer.
Literally only one piece of information could get through to your conscious awareness at a time, and everything else in the environment was entirely blocked and discarded.
But wait, if Broadbent is right and the bouncer kicks absolutely everyone else out, how do we explain when things do break through? The text immediately introduces the counter theory to fix this problem.
Treisman.
Filter attenuation theory was developed by Treisman, 1962, by modifying Broadbent's theory. This theory proposes that the stimuli not getting access to the selective filter at a given moment of time are not completely blocked.
Not blocked.
The filter only attenuates, weakens their strength. Thus, some stimuli manage to escape through the selective filter to reach higher levels of processing. It is indicated that personally relevant stimuli, for example, one's name in a collective dinner, can be noticed even at a very low level of sound.
That's the cocktail party effect.
So Broadbent says the bouncer aggressively removes everyone not on the list, but Treisman says the bouncer just makes the uninvited guests whisper. It's not a solid wall, it's a screen door.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Yes.
Yeah.
And Treisman realized that Broadbent's strict bouncer model couldn't explain what psychologists call the cocktail party effect.
Where you hear your name across the room.
Exactly. If you are at a loud party, deeply focused on a conversation with one person, you have theoretically filtered out the rest of the room. But if someone 20 feet away casually says your name, your head snaps around.
Right.
If Broadbent was right and the filter blocked everything, you never would have heard it. Treisman's attenuation theory says the other voices are just attenuated or turned down like a volume knob.
But I have to push back here. If Treisman is right and the screen door is letting all these whispers in, isn't my brain still subconsciously processing every single conversation in the room just waiting to hear my name?
Yep.
That seems like it takes way more energy than Broadbent's strict bottleneck. It sounds exhausting.
You've hit on the exact debate cognitive psychologists had for decades. Is the filter early, like Broadbent said, saving energy? Or is it late, like Treisman said, leaving for flexibility but costing way more computing power?
Oh, wow.
And that leads directly to the third theory, which tries to reconcile this exact problem of energy cost.
Let's read it. Multimode theory was developed by Johnston and Heinz in 1978. This theory believes that attention is a flexible system that allows selection of a stimulus over others at 3 stages. It is also suggested that more processing requires more mental effort.
Johnston and Heinz came in and basically said, you're both right, it just depends on the situation.
Okay.
The multimode theory argues that the filter is flexible. Sometimes, if a task is incredibly demanding, your brain acts like Broadbent's strict bouncer to save energy. Other times, if you have spare mental capacity, your brain acts like Treisman's screen door. The deeper the processing, the more mental effort it costs you.
And speaking of mental effort, what happens when we have to keep that attention fixed on one thing for a very long time? The text addresses this in the section on sustained attention.
This is a tough one for modern humans.
While selective attention is mainly concerned with the selection of stimuli, sustained attention is concerned with concentration. It refers to our ability to maintain attention on an object or event for longer durations. It is also known as vigilance.
Vigilant.
Air traffic controllers and radar readers provide us with good examples of this phenomenon. They have to constantly watch and monitor signals on screens. The occurrence of signals in such situations is usually unpredictable, and errors in detecting signals may be fatal. Hence, a great deal of vigilance is required.
High stakes.
It then lists the factors that influence this vigilance. Factors influencing sustained attention. Sensory modality is one of them. Performance is found to be superior when the stimuli, called signals, are auditory than when they are visual.
That's an important detail.
Clarity of stimuli is another factor. Temporal uncertainty is a third factor. When stimuli appear at regular intervals of time, they are attended better than when they appear at irregular intervals.
Predictability helps.
Spatial uncertainty is a fourth factor. Stimuli that appear at a fixed place are readily attended, whereas those that appear at random locations are difficult to attend.
Sustained attention, or vigilance, is incredibly taxing on the human brain. We're not built to stare at static things for hours.
Definitely not.
The example of the air traffic controller is perfect. They are looking at a radar screen, waiting for a tiny blip that might appear anywhere at any time.
Yee.
And the text points out some fascinating quirks about human vigilance.
Like the auditory thing.
Yeah, for instance, we are actually better at staying vigilant for auditory signals, like a beep, than visual signals on a screen.
That temporal and spatial uncertainty is the real killer. If we don't know when or where something will happen, our attention degrades quickly.
Very quickly.
If a radar blip flashes in the exact same spot every 5 seconds, you can watch it all day. But if it flashes randomly, anywhere on the screen, your brain gets exhausted trying to maintain that wide net of alertness.
Right.
The text then drops in 2 very interesting standalone boxes here. First is box 4.2 on the span of attention. I'm going to read this because it contains one of the most famous concepts in psychology.
Oh, the magic number.
Yes. Quote, "Our attention has a limited capacity to receive stimuli. The number of objects one can attend to at a brief exposure is called span of attention. On the basis of several experiments, Miller has reported that our span of attention varies within the limit of 7 plus or minus 2.
7 plus or minus 2.
This is popularly known as the magic number. It means that at a time, people can attend to a set of 5 to 7 numbers, which can be extended to 9 or more under exceptional conditions.
Right.
That is perhaps the reason why motorbikes or cars are given a number plate that contains only 4-digit numbers with some alphabets. In case of violation of driving rules, a traffic police can easily read and note these numbers along with the alphabets.
George Miller's magic number, 7 plus or minus 2. Published in 1956, this is a foundational pillar of cognitive psychology.
It's everywhere.
It essentially states that your conscious workspace, your short-term attentional span, can only hold about 5 to 9 chunks of information at any exact moment before older information starts falling out to make room for the new.
Think about a standard phone number before area codes became mandatory. It was exactly 7 digits. That wasn't an accident.
Nope, by design.
It's the upper limit of what the average person can hold in their mind long enough to dial it without actively repeating it over and over. And the text's license plate example proves the point perfectly. 4 digits and 2 letters fits neatly into that 5 to 7 span, allowing a traffic cop to memorize a speeding car's plate in a single high-stress glance.
Absolutely.
Now, the next box, box 4.3, addresses what happens when these attentional processes are fundamentally disrupted. It covers attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD.
This is a complex topic.
It's really interesting to see how this specific textbook frames the disorder. I'm going to read this exactly as the source material presents it.
Let's hear their take.
Quote, "This is a very common behavioral disorder found among children of the primary school age. It is characterized by impulsivity, excessive motor activity, and an inability to attend. The disorder is more prevalent among boys than among girls. Difficulty in sustaining attention is the central feature of this disorder. Such children are highly distractible. They do not follow instructions. They do poorly in school and show difficulties in reading or learning basic subjects in spite of the fact that there is no deficit in their intelligence."
And how do they address the causes?
Studies generally do not provide evidence for a biological basis of the disorder, whereas some relationship of the disorder with dietary factors, particularly food coloring, has been documented.
Interesting framing.
On the other hand, social psychological factors, e.g. home environment, family pathology, have been found to account for ADHD more reliably than other factors. Currently, ADHD is considered to have multiple causes and effects.
And what about treatment?
Disagreement remains over the most effective method of treatment of ADHD. A drug called Ritalin is widely used, which decreases children's overactivity and distractibility. However, it does not cure the problem, and often also results in such negative side effects as the suppression in normal growth of height and weight.
They're quite critical there.
On the other hand, behavioral management programs featuring positive reinforcement and structuring learning materials have been found quite useful. Successful modification of ADHD is claimed with cognitive behavioral training program in which rewards for desired behaviors are combined with training in the use of verbal self-instructions, stop, think, and then do.
It is incredibly fascinating to analyze how this specific text approaches the mechanics of ADHD.
Well, it really is.
The authors place a massive emphasis on socio-psychological factors, like home environment and dietary factors, explicitly stating that studies generally do not provide evidence for a biological basis.
Which is quite a stance.
That is a very specific framing of the disorder, especially compared to how a strictly neurobiological or modern psychiatric textbook might write this exact same chapter today, where they would heavily emphasize dopamine pathways and genetics.
Yes, the lens of the author is very apparent here. They also draw a stark contrast in treatments, highlighting the widespread use of the drug Ritalin and its potential physical side effects on growth, versus strongly advocating for behavioral management and cognitive behavioral training to help children learn internal regulation.
Right. It's a great example of how textbooks bring their own analytical priorities to behavioral topics.
So moving back to the cognitive assembly line, what does this all mean once we've successfully attended to a stimulus? We've gathered the light, we filtered out the noise, the data has passed the bouncer. Now what?
Now the real work begins.
Now we have to actually build reality. Which brings us to the core of the chapter, perceptual processes. The text transitions us from hardware to software here.
How do they phrase it?
In the previous section, we have examined that the stimulation of sensory organs leads us to experience something such as a flash of light or a sound or a smell. This elementary experience, called sensation, does not provide us with any understanding of the stimulus that stimulated the sense organ.
Again, sensation is dumb.
The process by which we recognize, interpret, or give meaning to the information provided by sense organs is called perception. In interpreting stimuli or events, individuals often construct them in their own ways.
Construct them.
Thus, perception is not merely an interpretation of objects or events of the external or internal world as they exist. Instead, it is also a construction of those objects and events from one's own point of view.
Constructing from your own point of view.
Then it dives into exactly how we construct those objects, asking, how do we identify an object? Do we identify a dog because we have first recognized its furry coat, its forelegs, its eyes, ears, and so on? Or do we recognize these different parts because we have first identified a dog?
That is the core question.
The idea that recognition process begins from the parts, which serve as the basis for the recognition of the whole, is known as bottom-up processing. The notion that recognition process begins from the whole, which leads to identification of its various components, is known as top-down processing.
This right here is the crux of how the brain builds the world. Bottom-up versus top-down processing.
Let's explain both.
Bottom-up processing is purely data-driven. It's what happens when you encounter something totally new and alien. You look at the separate features, the weird texture, the bizarre shape, the strange movement, and your brain builds those tiny pieces upwards into a cohesive concept. You start with the details and construct the big picture.
But top-down processing is the exact opposite. It is expectation-driven. It uses your past experiences, your memories, and context to impose meaning onto the raw data before you've even fully analyzed it.
Exactly.
I love the text's dog example. If I'm hiking in a dense, unfamiliar jungle and I see a weird animal in the brush, I have to use bottom-up processing. Okay, I see gray fur, I see four legs, a long snout, a bushy tail, assembling data. I think that's a wolf.
Right, you build the wolf out of the parts.
But if I'm sitting on my own couch in my living room and something furry brushes against my ankle, I use top-down processing. I recognize the context. I know my dog lives in this house, so I instantly identify the feeling as my dog, and therefore I expect the fur and the tail without even having to look down and verify the features.
Right. Top-down processing is a massive cognitive shortcut. It's how you could read a sentence, even if half the words are misspelled. Your brain knows the context of the sentence, so it anticipates the word and fills in the blanks, ignoring the actual visual data of the jumbled letters.
But this top-down processing relies heavily on who is doing the perceiving, which means two people can look at the exact same physical object and see two completely different realities.
Very true.
Which is why the text moves next to a section titled The Perceiver. Let's look at the internal biases we bring to the table.
What's the first bias?
Human beings are not just mechanical and passive recipients of stimuli from the external world. They are creative beings and try to understand the external world in their own ways.
Creative beings.
In this process, their motivations and expectations, cultural knowledge, past experiences and memories, as well as values, beliefs, and attitudes play an important role. Motivation. The needs and desires of a perceiver strongly influence his perception.
Back to motivation.
When hungry persons were shown ambiguous pictures, they were found to perceive them as pictures of food objects more often than satiated, non-hungry persons.
We touched on this with attention earlier, but here we see motivation actually altering perception itself.
Not just focusing, but altering.
Right. If you are deeply motivated by hunger, and I show you an ambiguous ink blot on a piece of paper, you don't just focus on food. The ink blot literally looks like a sandwich to you. Your brain is so eagerly anticipating calories that it forces the visual data to match its internal desire. The reality you perceive bends to your biological needs.
And expectation bends reality just as much. The text continues. Expectations or perceptual sets. The expectations about what we might perceive in a given situation also influence our perception. For example, if your milkman delivers you milk daily at about 5:30 a.m., any knocking at the door around that time is likely to be perceived as the presence of the milkman, even if it is someone else.
It's the ultimate mental shortcut.
Preloading reality.
Yes, if you expect a specific event at a specific time, your brain preloads the perceptual software. A knock at 5:30 a.m. is processed fully as the milkman before you even turn the doorknob. You might even hear the clink of glass bottles that isn't actually there because your top-down processing is working in overdrive.
Beyond transient things like hunger and daily expectations, the text argues we also have ingrained permanent ways of organizing visual information. It calls these cognitive styles. Listen to this breakdown.
Cognitive styles, okay.
Cognitive style refers to a consistent way of dealing with our environment. One most extensively used in studies is the field-dependent and field-independent cognitive style.
Field-dependent and independent.
Field-dependent people perceive the external world in its totality, i.e. in a global or holistic manner. On the other hand, field-independent people perceive the external world by breaking it into smaller units, i.e. in an analytic or differentiated manner.
And give a visual example, right?
Right. Yeah. They say, look at figure 4.2. Can you find out the triangle hidden in the picture? Those who can do it quickly will be called field-independent. Those who take long time will be called field-dependent.
This is a really profound way to categorize how people naturally navigate the world. Field-dependent people see the forest. They see the big picture, the social context, the global environment. Field-independent people see the trees, They can easily detach a specific, intricate detail from its messy background.
So in a practical sense, a field-independent person is the one who can instantly spot Waldo in a Where's Waldo book. They can ignore the chaotic field of the busy beach and isolate the red and white stripes.
Exactly. And in team dynamics, you need both. You need the field-dependent person to understand the whole vibe of a project and how the pieces connect globally, but you need the field-independent person to analyze the intricate data points without getting distracted by the surrounding noise.
And zooming out even further from individual cognitive styles, the text makes the case that our entire culture changes our literal eyesight.
This part is mind-blowing.
Under cultural background and experiences, it says, different experiences and learning opportunities available to people in different cultural settings also influence their perception. People coming from a pictureless environment fail to recognize objects in pictures.
Pictureless environment.
Hudson studied the perception of pictures by African subjects and noted several difficulties. Many of them were unable to identify objects depicted in pictures, for example, antelope, spear. They also failed to perceive distance in pictures and interpreted pictures incorrectly.
And there's another example.
Eskimos have been found to make fine distinction among a variety of snow that we may be unable to notice. Some Aboriginal groups of Siberian region have been found to differentiate among dozens of skin colors of reindeers, which we would not be able to do.
This is staggering when you truly sit with the implications. The hardware of the human eye, the retina, the optic nerve, is exactly the same across these cultures. But the software is entirely culturally programmed.
Totally programmed.
The Inuit and Siberian groups have trained their perceptual software over generations to distinguish incredibly fine details in snow texture or reindeer skin because their literal survival in harsh environments depends on it. A Westerner looking at the same patch of snow just sees white. The sensory data is identical, but the perception is wildly richer for the local culture.
And the Hudson study, that absolutely blows my mind. The idea that looking at a 2D drawing, say, a sketch of a man throwing a spear at an antelope, and understanding that a smaller antelope is supposed to be further away in the background, well, that is not a natural biological function. It is a learned cultural technology.
It really is.
If you grow up in a culture without a tradition of two-dimensional art or photography, you don't instantly know how to interpret a drawing. Your brain doesn't inherently know the artificial rules of 2D perspective. You have to be taught how to read a picture, just like you are taught to read an alphabet.
Which is a perfect segue into how the brain inherently tries to organize all this visual chaos when it doesn't have explicit cultural training. If perception is an act of construction, what are the architectural blueprints the brain uses? We need to look at the Gestalt principles.
Let's do it. We are moving to Principles of Perceptual Organization. The text frames it like this.
Okay.
Our visual field is a collection of different elements, such as points, lines, and colors. However, we perceive these elements as organized wholes or complete objects. For example, we see a bicycle as a complete object, not as a collection of different parts.
A bicycle.
The process of organizing visual field into meaningful wholes is known as form perception. The most widely accepted answer has been given by a group of researchers called Gestalt psychologists. Gestalt means a regular figure or a form.
Gestalt.
According to Gestalt psychologists, we perceive different stimuli not as discrete elements, but as an organized whole that carries a definite form. They believe that the form of an object lies in its whole, which is different from the sum of their parts.
Gestalt psychology, which originated in Germany in the early 20th century, is absolutely fundamental to understanding visual perception. The word Gestalt essentially translates to unified whole or configuration.
The unified whole.
The core philosophical idea is that the whole is fundamentally different from and greater than the sum of its parts. Think about a bicycle, like the text mentions. A bicycle isn't just a pile of rubber, some metal tubes, and a plastic seat. When those specific parts are arranged in a specific relationship to one another, they become a completely new entity, a vehicle. The bicycleness isn't in the rubber, it's in the overarching pattern.
The brain is obsessed with finding these overarching patterns. The text introduces a German word for this obsession.
Oh, pragnance?
The Gestalt psychologists also indicate that our cerebral processes are always oriented towards the perception of a good figure or pragnance. That is the reason why we perceive everything in an organized form.
Good figure.
The most primitive organization takes place in the form of figure-ground segregation. When we look at a surface, certain aspects of the surface clearly stand out as separate entities, whereas others do not. For example, when we see words on a page, or a painting on a wall, or birds flying in the sky, the words, the painting, and the birds stand out from the background and are perceived as figures, while the page, wall, and sky stay behind the figure and are perceived as background.
Figure and ground.
To test this experience, look at the figure 4.3 given below. You will see either the white part of the figure, which looks like a vase, flower pot, or the black part of the figure, which looks like two faces.
Pregnance, the law of good figure.
Yeah.
It basically means our brains are inherently lazy, but in the best, most efficient way possible. We want to organize the infinite visual chaos of the world into the simplest, most stable, most meaningful forms we can find. We hate ambiguity.
And the most basic primitive step of creating order out of chaos is separating the figure from the ground. You have to know what is the object you should care about and what is just the background noise behind it. The Rubens vase illusion they mention is the classic example of how fragile this process is. For you listening, imagine a pure black square. In the center of the square is a white silhouette of an ornate vase.
A classic image.
When you look at it, the white vase is the figure popping out at you, and the black is the ground receding behind it. But if you shift your perspective, the black area suddenly looks like two faces in profile looking at each other. Now the faces are the figure, and the white vase becomes the empty background space between them.
And here's the magic part. You cannot see both the vase and the faces simultaneously. It is neurologically impossible. Your brain forces you to make a choice. It insists on assigning one thing as the figure and one thing as the ground to maintain order.
So how does the brain decide what gets to be the figure in everyday life? The text lists a series of specific Gestalt laws of organization. We need to take our time and unpack each one of these, because once you learn them, you will see your brain applying them everywhere you look.
Let's go through them.
First, let's look at the principle of proximity. Quote, objects that are close together in space or time are perceived as belonging together or as a group.
Proximity is incredibly powerful. Imagine you draw 16 identical dots on a piece of paper. If you space them out perfectly evenly in a square grid, your brain just sees a square of dots.
Just a square?
But if you move the dots slightly so they are closer to each other vertically than they are horizontally, your brain instantly stops seeing a square and instead sees 4 columns of dots. Nothing changed except the spacing, but your brain grouped the close things together to create a new form.
Okay, next is the principle of similarity. Objects that are similar to one another and have similar characteristics are perceived as a group.
Let's go back to that grid of 16 identical dots. This time they are spaced perfectly evenly, but imagine I color alternating rows red and blue. So a red row, a blue row, a red row, a blue row.
Okay, red and blue.
Even though the spacing is identical everywhere, your brain immediately groups the red dots together and the blue dots together. It organizes by likeness. This is why sports teams wear matching uniforms. Our brains instantly group the players into 2 distinct cohesive units based on color similarity, despite the chaotic movement on the field.
Next, the principle of continuity. This principle states that we tend to perceive objects as belonging together if they appear to form a continuous pattern.
We deeply prefer continuous, unbroken paths.
Yeah.
If you draw a large letter X on a page, you perceive it as 2 long, straight, intersecting diagonal lines. You do not perceive it as 2 V-shapes whose points happen to be touching in the middle, even though technically that's a perfectly valid interpretation of the ink. Your brain assumes lines continue in the direction they started.
It's all about expecting the smoothest, simplest path. The next 2 are tricks for figuring out what is the object and what is the background. The principle of smallness. According to this principle, smaller areas tend to be seen as figures against a larger background, and the principle of symmetry. This principle suggests that symmetrical areas tend to be seen as figures against asymmetrical backgrounds.
If you are looking at a complex pattern, and one area is much smaller than the rest, your brain assumes the small thing is a distinct object sitting on top of a larger surface.
It's symmetry.
Symmetry is a huge biological cue. In nature, living things, animals, leaves, faces, tend to be highly symmetrical, while the background environment, rocks, clouds, dirt, is asymmetrical. So if your visual field detects a perfectly symmetrical shape, it immediately highlights it as the figure because it might be a living thing.
Then we have the principle of surroundedness. According to this principle, the areas surrounded by others tend to be perceived as figures.
That one is fairly straightforward. If a puddle of water is entirely surrounded by dry concrete, the puddle becomes the figure.
But this last one is my absolute favorite, the principle of closure. We tend to fill the gaps in stimulation and perceive the objects as whole rather than their separate parts. For example, the small angles are seen as a triangle due to our tendency to fill the gaps in the object provided by our sensory input.
Closure is where your brain basically acts as a line completionist.
Lying completionist.
Yeah, if I draw a circle on a whiteboard, but I purposely leave 3 large gaps on the line, you don't look at it and say, ah, yes, 3 curved dashes. You look at it and say, that's a circle.
So my brain literally hallucinates the missing ink to complete the familiar shape.
It does, because an incomplete shape causes cognitive tension. From a survival standpoint, if an early human saw the tail of a tiger sticking out from behind a rock and the head of a tiger sticking out from the other side, they needed a brain that would use closure to instantly perceive one whole dangerous tiger rather than 2 separate harmless animal parts. The brain fills in the missing gaps to keep you safe.
Which is an incredible segue into how we perceive the three-dimensional world, because that involves a massive amount of the brain filling in the gaps of reality.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's move to perception of space, depth, and distance. The text sets up a fascinating biological problem here.
What's the problem?
The visual field or surface in which things exist, move, or can be placed is called space. The space in which we live is organized in 3 dimensions.
3 dimensions.
While the images of objects projected onto our retina are flat and 2-dimensional, left, right, up, down, we still perceive 3 dimensions in the space. Why does it happen so?
Why indeed?
It occurs due to our ability to transfer a 2-dimensional retinal vision into a 3-dimensional perception. The process of viewing the world in 3 dimensions is called distance or depth perception.
It's quite a trick.
In perceiving depth, we depend on 2 main sources of information called cues. One is called binocular cues because they require both eyes. Another is called monocular cues because they allow us to perceive depth with just one eye.
I want to make sure everyone listening really grasps the magnitude of this. Your retina, the light-sensitive tissue lining the back of your eyeball, is a completely flat surface. It is a 2D projection screen.
Completely flat.
When you look at a 3D cube in the real world, the light hitting your eye only creates a flat 2D hexagon on your retina. All the visual data entering your brain is 2-dimensional.
So I am essentially living inside a movie theater, watching a flat screen, but I am entirely convinced the world has physical depth. I am hallucinating the 3rd dimension.
Yes, you are hallucinating depth using a series of visual cheat codes or cues that your brain has learned to calculate at lightning speed.
Let's run through these cheat codes. The text calls the first set monocular cues or pictorial cues because an artist can literally paint them on a flat canvas to fake 3D depth.
The painter's toolkit.
I'm going to read the list from the text, and I want to explore these like we're teaching a Renaissance art class. First is relative size. As the objects get away, the retinal image becomes smaller. We tend to perceive an object farther away when it appears small and closer when it appears bigger.
Yeah.
Second is interposition or overlapping. The overlapped object is considered farther away, whereas the object that covers it appears nearer.
These are the most basic rules of painting. If you want to paint a landscape with 2 identical trees, you paint the tree in the background physically smaller on the canvas. Your brain knows trees are roughly the same size, so if one is smaller, it mathematically must be further away.
An interposition.
Interposition is just common sense logic.
Yeah.
If an apple is blocking my view of an orange, the apple must be in front of the orange.
Third is linear perspective. Parallel lines, such as real tracks, appear to converge with increasing distance with a vanishing point at the horizon.
The classic train tracks.
Fourth is aerial perspective. Microscopic particles of dust and moisture that make distant objects look hazy or blurry. Distant mountains appear blue.
Linear perspective is the geometrical trick that blew everyone's minds during the Renaissance. Parallel lines in the real world don't actually get closer together, but on your flat retina, they do. So if you draw train tracks converging to a single point, the brain interprets that convergence as extreme distance.
And aerial perspective.
Aerial perspective is environmental. Air isn't completely empty. It has dust and water vapor. So the further away a mountain is, the more hazy, low contrast, and bluish it appears, because you are looking through miles of atmospheric interference.
The artist's toolkit continues. Fifth is light and shade. Highlights and shadows provide us with information about an object's distance.
Crucial for volume.
Sixth is relative height. Larger objects are perceived as being closer, and smaller objects as being farther away. Wait, the text clarifies this oddly. It actually says, when we expect 2 objects to be the same size and they are not, the larger of the 2 will appear closer and the smaller will appear farther away.
That's essentially a restatement of relative size combined with expectation. But light and shade is crucial for perceiving 3D volume. A circle drawn on paper is flat. But if you shade the bottom right edge dark and put a bright white highlight on the top left, your brain suddenly perceives a 3D sphere. Your brain assumes light comes from above because of the sun and uses the shadow to calculate the curve of the object.
Seventh is texture gradient. The visual field having more density of elements is seen farther away. In the figure 4.12, the density of stones increases as we look farther away.
Texture gradient.
And eighth is motion parallax. It is a kinetic monocular cue. It occurs when objects at different distances move at a different relative speed. The distant objects appear to move slowly than the objects that are close. When we travel in a bus, closer objects move against the direction of the bus, whereas the farther objects move with the direction of the bus.
Texture gradient is a beautiful, subtle cue. If you look down at a cobblestone street right at your feet, you can clearly see the mortar between every individual stone. But as you look 100 yards down the street, those stones compress visually into a dense, blurry, uniform texture.
And motion parallax.
Motion parallax is that specific hypnotic feeling you get looking out the side window of a moving car on the highway. The guardrail right next to the car zips by in a complete blur. But the mountains 10 miles away on the horizon barely seem to move at all.
Oh, I love that feeling.
Because of geometry, closer objects cross your field of view faster than distant objects. Your brain uses that relative speed difference to calculate exactly how far away things are, even if you close one eye.
Which brings us to the cues that require two eyes. Binocular cues. If you only have one eye, you can still drive a car using those monocular tricks. But having two eyes gives you the real biological magic. Let's read what the text says.
Let's do it.
Retinal or binocular disparity. Retinal disparity occurs because the two eyes have different locations in our head. They are separated from each other horizontally by a distance of about 6.5 centimeters.
6.5 centimeters.
Because of this distance, the image formed on the retina of each eye of the same object is slightly different. This difference between the two images is called retinal disparity. The brain interprets a large retinal disparity to mean a close object and a small retinal disparity to mean a distant object.
This is the exact mechanism that virtual reality headsets use to trick your brain. Because your eyes are a few inches apart, they view the world from two slightly different angles.
Try this right now.
Yeah, hold your index finger about 6 inches in front of your nose. Close your left eye and look at the finger. Now open the left and close the right. Alternate rapidly.
Yeah.
Your finger seems to jump wildly back and forth across the background. That huge jump is a large retinal disparity.
It jumps a lot.
Now, do the exact same thing while looking at a tree down the street. The tree doesn't appear to move at all. The brain takes those two different video feeds, overlaps them, measures the discrepancy, and uses it to calculate depth with absolute pinpoint accuracy.
The textbook then lists two more binocular cues that rely on the actual physical meat and muscles of your face.
Physical muscles.
Convergence. When we see a nearby object, our eyes converge inward in order to bring the image on the fovea of each eye. A group of muscles send messages to the brain regarding the degree to which eyes are turning inward, and these messages are interpreted as cues to the perception of depth.
Invert.
Accommodation. Accommodation refers to a process by which we focus the image on the retina with the help of ciliary muscle. These muscles change the thickness of the lens of the eye. If the object gets away, more than 2 meters, the muscle is relaxed.
And if it gets close?
As the object moves nearer, the muscle contracts and the thickness of the lens increases. The signal about the degree of contraction of the muscle is sent to the brain, which provides the cue for distance.
These are physiological cues. Convergence is literally just going cross-eyed. If a mosquito flies right up to your nose, your eyeballs have to physically rotate inward to keep looking at it. Your brain monitors the tension in the muscles rotating your eyeballs and translates that muscular strain directly into a distance measurement.
And accommodation.
Accommodation is similar, but it's measuring the tiny muscles inside your eyeball. To keep an object in sharp focus as it gets closer to you, a muscle has to physically squeeze and stretch the crystalline lens inside your eye to bend the light more sharply. Your brain feels that muscle squeezing and says, muscle tension is high. This object must be very close. The brain is using your own muscle tension as a ruler.
It is exhausting just thinking about the sheer amount of subconscious trigonometry the brain is doing every single second just to let us walk down a hallway without running into a wall.
It really is a marvel.
But with all these changing angles, distances, and lighting conditions, how does the world not look like a constantly warping, chaotic funhouse? That brings us to perceptual constancies and illusions.
Constancy save us.
Here is the text on constancies. The sensory information that we receive from our environment constantly changes as we move around. Yet we form a stable perception of an object seen from any position and in any intensity of light. Perception of the objects as relatively stable in spite of changes in the stimulation of sensory receptors is called perceptual constancy.
Stable perception.
Size constancy. The size of an image on our retina changes with the change in the distance of the object from the eye. Our experience shows that within limits, the object appears to be about the same size irrespective of its distance. For example, when you approach your friend from a distance, your perception of the friend's size does not change much despite the fact that the retinal image becomes larger.
Constancy is your brain acting as a supreme stabilizer. If we didn't have size constancy, every time a friend walked towards you from across the street, your brain would take the raw data literally and perceive them as physically growing into a 10-foot giant because the image expanding on your retina is getting bigger. But your brain knows your friend is a fixed size, so it overrides the raw data and says they aren't growing, they're just getting closer.
The text gives two more types. Shape constancy. In our perceptions, the shapes of familiar objects remain unchanged despite changes in the pattern of retinal image resulting from differences in their orientation. For example, a dinner plate looks the same shape, whether the image that it casts on the retina is a circle or an ellipse, or roughly a short line if the plate is viewed from the edge.
That's a constancy.
Brightness constancy. Visual objects not only appear constant in their shape and size, they also appear constant in their degree of whiteness, grayness, or blackness, even though the amount of physical energy reflected from them changes considerably. For example, surface of a paper which appears white in the sunlight is still perceived as white in the room light. Similarly, coal that looks black in the sun also looks black in room light.
Shape constancy is why a door opening toward you doesn't suddenly warp from a rectangle into a bizarre skewed trapezoid in your mind.
And brightness constancy.
Brightness constancy is incredible. This is why a piece of black hole sitting out in the bright, glaring noon sun still looks black to us, even though physically, the raw photons bouncing off that coal in the sun are far more intense than the photons bouncing off a white piece of paper in a dim closet. The brain calculates the ambient lighting of the whole environment and dynamically adjusts the contrast ratio of what you see.
But sometimes, our brain's autocorrect gets it wrong. It overcompensates based on these rules, and we experience a glitch in reality. And that brings us to illusions. Let's read the text on this.
The fun part.
Illusions.
Our perceptions are not always veridical. Sometimes we fail to interpret the sensory information correctly. This results in a mismatch between the physical stimuli and its perception. These misperceptions resulting from misinterpretation of information received by our sensory organs are generally known as illusions.
Smash.
Geometrical illusions. In figure 4.13, the Muller-Lyer illusion has been shown. All of us perceive line A as shorter than line B, although both the lines are equal. Besides Muller-Lyer illusion, several other visual illusions are experienced by human beings. You can see the illusion of vertical and horizontal lines. Although both the lines are equal, we perceive the vertical line as longer than the horizontal line. These geometric illusions prove that our 3D cheat codes can be used against us. The Muller-Lyer illusion is perhaps the most famous in psychology. It's two straight horizontal lines of identical length. But one line has arrowheads on the ends pointing inward, the other has arrowheads pointing outward.
Right.
Even when you hold a physical ruler up to the page and definitively prove they are exactly the same length, your brain simply refuses to see them as equal.
What?
The line with the outward pointing arrows looks visibly stretched and longer.
And the vertical-horizontal illusion is equally frustrating. If you draw a perfect upside-down T, where the vertical stem and the horizontal base are exactly 2 inches long, the vertical line always looks longer to the human eye. It's why tall buildings look even taller than they actually are from the ground.
Very true.
But the text introduces one more illusion, and it's my favorite because modern entertainment relies on it. Apparent movement illusion. This illusion is experienced when some motionless pictures are projected one after another at an appropriate rate. This illusion is referred to as phi phenomenon. When we see moving pictures in a cinema show, we are influenced by this kind of illusion. The succession of flickering electrical lights also generate this illusion.
The phi phenomenon. Without this glitch in our brain, cinema, television, and video games wouldn't exist. A movie is not a moving image. It is just 24 completely static, frozen photographs flashed on a screen every second. There is zero actual physical movement happening.
Right.
But our brain, remembering the Gestalt law of continuity, abhors the jerky gaps between the photos, so it hallucinates smooth motion to stitch the static frames together.
We perceive continuous sweeping motion, but the physical reality is just a rapid slideshow. It's beautiful, which leads us to our final section, and arguably the most profound point of the entire text.
Sociocultural influences.
We touched on cultural differences earlier, but the text goes much deeper into sociocultural influences on perception. To answer a massive question, are these illusions universal to all human biology, or are they learned? Let's read.
Let's see what they say.
Several psychologists have studied the processes of perception in different sociocultural settings. The questions they try to answer through these studies are, does perceptual organization of people living in different cultural settings take place in a uniform manner?
A great question.
Seagull, Campbell, and Herskovitz carried out the most extensive study of illusion susceptibility by comparing samples from remote African villages and Western urban settings. It was found that African subjects showed greater susceptibility to horizontal-vertical illusion, whereas Western subjects showed greater susceptibility to Muller-Lyer illusion.
This study is legendary.
The authors then explain exactly why this happens. Living in dense forests, the African subjects regularly experienced verticality, e.g. long trees, and developed a tendency to overestimate it.
It's all true.
The Westerners, who lived in an environment characterized by right angles, developed a tendency to underestimate the length of lines characterized by enclosure, for example, arrowhead. It suggests that the habits of perception are learned differently in different cultural settings.
It proves that reality is a learned habit. They wanted to know if the Muller-Lyer illusion, the arrows making the lines look different lengths, was a hardwired human biological flaw or a culturally learned software bug. They found it was entirely cultural.
So cultural software bug.
Right. If you grew up in a Western urban environment, what psychologists call a carpentered world, you spend your entire life surrounded by rectangular buildings, square rooms, right angles, and straight lines. Your brain learns specific geometric rules for guessing 3D distance based on building corners. The inward and outward arrows of the Muller-Lyer illusion subconsciously mimic the inside and outside corners of a 3D room, tricking the city-dwelling brain into applying 3D depth scaling to a flat 2D line.
Wait, so if I wasn't raised in a carpentered city, I wouldn't see the optical illusion. That's wild.
Exactly. If you are a hunter-gatherer living in a dense natural forest or an open plain, you aren't surrounded by perfect right angles and perfectly straight geometric corners. Your brain never needed to learn those specific carpentered rules, so the Muller-Lyer illusion barely fools you at all.
Wow.
However, because you live in a forest surrounded by incredibly tall, perfectly straight trees, your brain becomes highly attuned and sensitive to verticality. Therefore, you fall victim to the vertical-horizontal illusion much more strongly than a city dweller. Your environment dictates which illusions you are vulnerable to.
The text wraps up the chapter by returning to the Hudson study to hammer this point home. Sinha and Mishra have carried out several studies on pictorial perception using a variety of pictures with people from diverse cultural settings. Their studies indicate that interpretation of pictures is strongly related to cultural experiences of people. While people in general can recognize familiar objects in pictures, those less exposed to pictures have difficulty in the interpretation of actions or events depicted in them.
If you aren't exposed to two-dimensional pictures, interpreting the actions within them is a struggle. If you see a drawing of a man mid-stride, running, we see motion. Someone from a pictureless culture might just see a man balancing awkwardly on one leg. Our entire reality, down to how we perceive a simple line on a page, is a complex habit we pick up from the environment we inhabit.
Okay, let's unpack everything we've covered on this massive journey. We started with raw, dumb physical stimuli hitting our seven sense organs, the camera hardware of the eyes, ears, and those deep kinesthetic and vestibular systems. We explored psychophysics, uncovering our absolute and difference thresholds constrained by the chaotic noise of our own biology.
It was quite a journey.
Then we looked at the gatekeeper, attention. We explored how the brain filters the overwhelming noise, placing crucial things in the focus while monitoring the fringe, and the sheer impossibility of true multitasking. We saw how our internal motivations, like hunger, hijack or selective attention, and we debated the energetic costs of Broadbent's strict bottleneck versus Treisman's leaky screen door.
The bouncer versus the screen door.
Finally, we explored how our brain takes that filtered data and actively builds our reality using top-down expectations. Those lazy but efficient Gestalt laws of organization, complex subconscious trigonometry for 3D depth, and the stabilizing forces of perceptual constancies. And we ended with the profound realization that all of this is heavily modified by the specific cultural and environmental landscape we happen to be raised in.
It's an unbelievably intricate chain of events happening in milliseconds. And it leaves us with a genuinely provocative thought to mull over.
What's that?
If our visual habits and our very perception of reality are learned from the architecture of our environment, as we clearly saw with the forest dwellers versus the city dwellers in the carpentered world, how is our modern environment changing us right now?
Oh, that's a good point.
If previous generations were perceptually rewired by the invention of right-angled rooms and buildings, how is the massive, unprecedented shift to looking at glowing, perfectly flat 2D screens for 10 to 12 hours a day fundamentally rewiring the way our brains organize and perceive physical space? What new perceptual habits are we forcing our brains to learn?
Are we currently developing new, unique, screen world optical illusions that previous generations wouldn't even understand? As you go about your day today, look around the room you are in. Notice what is sharp in your focus and what is fading into your fringe. Look for the Gestalt laws. See where your brain is grouping things by proximity or hallucinating closure. See if you can spot how your brain is actively working, in real time, to construct the movie of the world around you. Thank you for joining us on this deep